I'm Dr. Jake Caylor. I'm out of Austin, Texas. I'm a pain specialist in America. I'm an interventional pain specialist who works with advanced therapies and also cancer pain management. And this is part 2 of our ongoing series every Thursday at 12:30, where we're really looking at bringing education back to patients. Because of the ice storms in Texas, I'm broadcasting live from my closet. This is the only place in my house where I can do telemedicine and be quiet with my baby. But I just wanted to be able to share kind of these points for today. As I mentioned last time, the goal of this is really to bring education back to our patients, so that we can advocate for ourselves, so that we can advocate for our loved ones as we go through our pain and spine care. So welcome. Today's Pain 101, the basics of pain pathways, where we're really going to be looking at some of the fundamentals of how a pain impulse travels from the periphery to our brain, how it's modulated, and how that central nervous system can process different pathways. So I'm going to share my slides, and we're going to go through these over the course of this next 20 minutes. Most people aren't. I don't know if anyone else is not working today, but if you're not working, this might go a little bit longer. And if we have some time, we can talk for a little bit longer today. Ask questions. This is supposed to be interactive. And if this is too in the weeds, that's okay. The goal for this is to be able to stop, pause, reflect, think about how pain has changed our lives. Hey, everyone, nice to see you. And think about how, our pain plays a role in our everyday lives, and how all the things that go into our lives affects our pain. So we're going to start with the basics of pain pathways. And so today we're really going to be focusing, okay, how does a pain signal start and how does it reach the brain? What process does that undergo? The second thing we're going to do is figure out how does the brain process that signal? And what are the things that are involved? What different parts of the brain are involved in that? And that's going to be really cool, because there's not even a lot of pain doctors that understand this information. But I think we've boiled it down to something that's very digestible. And then really, how does your brain control pain? And these 3 things are going to form the basis of how we as pain physicians both diagnose and treat pain. Where does pain start? Where does it go to? What makes it better? What makes it worse? You've heard us ask these questions before. There's a reason. There's a reason based in biology as to why, when we're asking you to describe what your pain feels like, we want to know that for a reason. So that's what we're going to be exploring today. And then our procedure highlight for the day is actually epidural steroid injections. It's an injection that many people have had before, especially if you have a history of pain or spine pain. You're familiar with epidurals. We're going to talk about the 3 classes of epidurals, what they mean, what they target, and really boiling down, that these are not shots, that these are targeted injections, and the location and what's in them matters. So thank you so much for joining me today. We're gonna have a really good time. In general, I don't know if you can see my mouse. You might be able to. Pain starts somewhere in the periphery. And that means there's a stimulus, we call it a noxious stimulus, where a pain signal starts in the body and goes to the spinal cord. From the spinal cord, it synapses with another neuron, meaning that signal is taken from one neuron, goes to another neuron, and that travels up the spinal cord into the brain. The brain then processes that signal through very complex signaling architecture, and that's what our perception of pain is. From there, the brain actually controls the inputs that goes to it through this thing called descending modulation. And descending modulation is actually the signal from your brain controlling the pain signals that get to it. So we're going to start with one. How does pain reach the brain? And what really has to happen is this thing called a nociceptor. So there's different types of apparatuses that can sense things. They can sense pressure. We can sense sharp things. We can sense hot. We can sense cold. We can sense taste. All of these things are signals that start as chemical signals and turn into a signal that goes into the spinal cord. Here you can see a flame that's transmitting through a pseudounipolar neuron and attaching to an interneuron, and then goes into the spinal cord. That's that big gray thing here. It's going to another neuron here and then going up the spinal cord. And so this is the first thing that happens, where One neuron sends information to another neuron, and there's this little thing called an interneuron. That's the green thing here. Now, this is a vast oversimplification of what's happening here, but there's a very small circuit that controls all this information that goes to the brain, okay? And this is what it's boiled down to look like, but in reality, there's two types of fibers, all right? A delta fibers, which carry fast pain, and C fibers, which carry slow pain. That's why if you bump your elbow, you might feel an initial sharp, followed later by a dull, achy pain at that area. And those are the two different fibers. So when we're asking you what you're feeling, where you're feeling it, there's a reason. And this is kind of step one. All right. Other fibers can carry pain signals too. They're not included here because it's really outside of the scope of this. But when we talk about sympathetic fibers, that's one. Gut fibers, the visceral fibers. So there's so many different types of fibers that can carry pain. But this is the bread and butter of it. This interneuron here is actually the key to a lot of targets that we offer in pain medicine. And so in reality, it might actually look, it's much more complicated than this. But we boiled it down to just being this green little interneuron, because that interneuron is kind of what we're focusing on when we're treating things with spinal cord stimulation or pain pumps or even injections. So that's where inflammation can happen. And that interneuron is the key to whether a signal gets to the brain or doesn't get to the brain. So that interneuron kind of controls things. All right. So to boil down this page, something happens like a flame that sends a signal to the spinal cord. It goes up the spinal cord to the brain. The interneuron controls whether that signal goes to the brain or doesn't go to the brain. But that is the basis of how one neuron sends an information to another neuron that goes to the brain. So now we're going to focus on the brain. And the brain says, oh, we've got a signal. All right. So that's coming from below, the bottom part here. And the first thing that kind of gets this information is the thalamus. Now, I don't want you to focus on this, but this is a simplification of an even much more complicated picture. And to be honest, not a lot of pain doctors even know about this stuff here. We have the insula, we have the ACC, we have the primary and secondary somatosensory cortexes. We don't need to know that. What I want to do is boil it down to four different things, four different regions that can explain how we integrate pain. And so we look at the thalamus. This is the first section. Just look at this blob. It's somewhere in the middle of the brain. It's kind of the first place that the brain gets a pain signal. And the thalamus is kind of like our relay system. So the relay station where all the information goes through and gets sent out to other areas. So this is the first stop that signal is going to make as it goes to the rest of the brain. From there, pain signals are relayed to the sensory cortex. This is part of our brain that actually feels. There's a small miniature U on this part of the brain. It's called the homunculus, but it sits on this part of the brain. And this part of the brain really receives those pain signals. That is also integrated with this thing called the limbic system. And the limbic system is really emotional affective integration of pain. And this is why it's so important to talk about the two components of pain. You have your somatosensory component of pain, which we talked about before, right? We talked about the somatosensory, the signals that are going to the brain here. But we also talked about here, the limbic system, how you're feeling, how much you have in the tank, how you feel about your pain, the idea of suffering. This is where this is rooted in. And so you can't just say pain is a sensory experience. It's also an emotional experience. And those things are both very real. So when we talk about evaluating your pain and how you feel about it, these two areas then communicate with the prefrontal cortex. And this is really pain processing. It's consciousness. It's understanding, the feelings of pain that you're having and how you're actually feeling about having pain. So when we talk about when we talk about pain, we can't just talk about what I'm feeling. We can't just say, oh, it's an 8 out of 10. And that's why I tell patients constantly, the number might be important to some people, but it's not to me. It's more important. How does that pain make you feel? What does it feel like? Where does it start? Where does it go? The way we describe our pain and how it affects us is so important to understanding the underlying pathology. And that's when we get to the pain matrix. It's all of these things together. And we boiled it down to 4 simple areas today, but there's actually so many more that are involved. But this is, if we can get to these kind of 4 different areas of pain, then you'll actually understand it more than a lot of people will. So pain, like I said before, it's a complex. We've already looked at these diagrams. It's a complex sensory and emotional experience, and it's an integration of 2 things. It's an integration of what you feel and how you feel. These 2 things, and when I talk to patients, I always say, okay, it's not just what you feel, it's everything else that goes into it. Think about how much you have in the tank to deal with the pain you have. And that's oftentimes when I talk to patients and they say, oh, my pain is worse with being under severe stress. My pain's worse when I haven't been able to sleep at night. That makes sense. That's that limbic system. That's how much we have in the tank to be able to deal with the pain that we have. So thanks for joining me for this part of it. This, in my opinion, is one of the most complex fundamental aspects of pain medicine that we do a terrible job at. And that's why I really wanted to bring it to your attention early. So all these pain pathways are so important. So we've talked about how pain reaches the brain. We've talked about, okay, how pain is processed in the brain. And now we're going to talk about how your brain, yes, yours, controls pain. And that's called descending modulation. If you look on the right side, we've seen, okay, the pain starts at the finger. It's going to go into the spinal cord. It's going to go up this red thing called the spinal thalamic tract, and it's going to come back down, and that's called descending modulation. And that's your brain exerting control over it. And so when we talk about putting patients on certain type of medications, we're trying to take advantage of the brain's innate systems. So that's descending control. And if you think about it, if your brain didn't control what signals you felt and it didn't do it constantly, then we'd be in sensory overload always. And just to highlight it, you probably haven't been thinking about it, but think about your right pinky toe right now. I bet you weren't thinking about it, but now you're probably thinking about it. Imagine if you weren't able to control what you felt at any time. And you have to do it subconsciously. You can't do it consciously. So if you weren't able to do that, we'd constantly be on sensory overload. And this in general is what we're trying to get to the root of when we're talking about descending control of both pain pathways and sensory pathways to our brain. And if you think about it, if the spinal cord is the airport, then the brain is really kind of like the traffic control, the traffic control tower that's controlling what planes are going. If there were no air traffic control telling you where to go, it'd be a nightmare. Everything would be taking off at once and we wouldn't be able to control it. And that's one of the things we think about with chronic pain. We think about, okay, there's a problem between the air traffic controller and the tower. And when we're trying to get to the root of pain, we're thinking, okay, what's wrong? Is this a problem in the periphery out here with arthritis, with inflammation in the rest of the body? Is this a problem of inflammation of the spinal cord? Why are there pathways here that are disorganized, that aren't functioning appropriately? So that's really the 3 reasons that I wanted, and the three education points that I wanted to talk about today. How pain gets to the brain, how your brain integrates that pain signal, and how your brain can control pain. And down the road, we're actually going to be talking about different medications and therapies that affect each of these pathways. And when we think of the whole patient, how important it is to actually think about where the breakdown is in our therapy. Because in pain medicine, we're not just throwing pills at people. What we're doing is trying to deliver targeted multimodal analgesics, so working on different pathways, targeted therapies, and we're trying to match a therapy, so a treatment, to the origin pathology, what caused it, and why it's continuing to be painful for the patient. So thank you for joining me for this first part, and now we're going to move into our procedure spotlight. And what did I say last week? They're not shots. We don't do shots here. We do targeted injections. So we're moving past this, and we're going to talk about epidurals. So this is a cross-section of a vertebral body. In the middle is the spinal cord, and it's surrounded by these things called the meninges. The meninges are the protective layers of the brain and spinal cord. And when we're doing an epidural, we're placing medication into a space. We call it an epidural, but in reality, it's it's not an epidural injection. We're actually putting medicine between the meninges and the next layering of the body. And so with the three classes of epidurals, the location matters. And I'll show you that here in a second. Like I said, the epidural is actually a space in the spine. So when you think about epidurals for pregnancy, they're using that space to deliver a local anesthetic to numb the patient up for delivery. But it's outside of the three protective coverings of the nervous system. So we can put anything there we want, theoretically. Like I said, I know my slides too well. I already said this earlier, sorry. And like I said before, they're not shots. So the three coverings of the spinal cord, the pia, and the arachnoid monitor and the dura monitor. So these sit on top of the spinal cord, and I'm trying to use my mouse, and we're really targeting this space here around the spinal cord. So it goes spinal cord in the middle, and then around we have cerebrospinal fluid, the outer layer of the spinal cord, the dura mater, and then the epidural space. So with these injections, we're trying to treat inflammation, we're trying to treat pinching, we're trying to treat overactive nerve fibers. So a problem with that thing that we were talking about earlier with pain signaling, that's what we're doing here with epidural steroid injections. Now we're going to talk about the three classes. So you might have seen this picture last time. There's three approaches. There's what we have called the interlaminar, which is the down the middle approach. We have the transforaminal, which is from the side. And we have the caudal approach, which is through the sacral hiatus. And I'm going to show you some contrast pictures of the actual fluoroscopy when we perform the procedure so you can see the difference here. So an interlaminar, down the middle at the targeted level. And this is a picture of it. You can see it's going down the middle. Here's the spine. We have the sacrum down here. And we have contrast dye that's spreading into the epidural space. Now you might remember from this picture, okay, well, that has to be this posterior aspect. And that's what we think about with interlaminar epidurals, that the medicine stays back here. Now I'm going to show you transforaminals where we come from the side. And the side, the medicine's more likely to get to the front of the spinal cord. So like I said before, the epidural space is a space, but they can have vastly profound implications. So if medicine's more likely to get to the front of the spinal cord, it might be more likely to get through this pinched area or to where the disc is. But if it's more likely to be on the back, then it might be more likely to sit where there's pinching in the middle here, or where there's automaticity and the dorsal horn architecture here. We'll get to that down the road. Don't worry about that word. So interlaminar, down the middle. Now I want to show you how different this is from another one of our shots, and that's the transforaminal. So a transforaminal looks like this. You can see that looks very different, right? It's not in the middle, and you actually have medicine that's now surrounding that nerve through a tight space and wrapping around into the front. This is a two-dimensional picture of a three-dimensional representation. And that's why when we're doing procedures, it's so important to move the X-ray machine one side to the other to be able to see where that contrast is spreading. And that's the goal of this here, is these different injections have different ramifications. And then we have a caudal epidural, which is the tailbone epidural, and that's the lower down epidural. So you can see that this hits these lower sacral nerve roots, right? This is more of our S1 or S2 or S3 or S4, not the higher lumbar or not the lower lumbar nerve roots. So all of these have different implications, and where the contrast spread really shows where the medicine is going. And so that's the difference here between an interlaminar, a transforaminal, and a caudal epidural. With an interlaminar, it's kind of more of our bread and butter. It's going to stay on the posterior aspect of the spinal cord and treat general pain. For transforaminal, we're trying to be very targeted. That's where we're going right at that nerve root, right where that disc bulge is, right where that stenosis is, that tight area where that's pinching the nerve. And then the caudal, the low down tailbone injection, where we're trying to treat patients from a lower down approach, maybe the lower sciatica roots to get to those nerve roots. So each of these has its place. And when you're working with your physician, you feel free to ask them, why that approach? Why that approach for an epidural? What are we trying to figure out here, or what are we trying to treat? And that's the importance of a therapeutic relationship. And again, the importance of all of this is so that you can advocate for yourself and your loved ones, because we believe you to be powerful and smart and very, very capable of understanding this information. reach out to me on Facebook, and definitely reach out to answer questions. I'll generally get to your questions over the next couple days to a week, and then I look forward to seeing you guys next week. So we'll take a question and answer if you have any at this time. We have some cool stories online that you can always check out from our patients, and we'll be continuing to work through this. Next week, we're going to be talking about some other cool things, and that's really what is pain medicine. When is it time to see a pain specialist? When is it time to and what's the role of a pain specialist in today's day and age? It seems like everyone does pain. And so I think that's a really cool question that we're going to start to answer next week. So.